My guest today is Anna Graves. Anna is the founder of the Field Academy in Denver, Colorado, a traveling high school that this academic year is collaborating with the Aurora Public Schools, the Englewood Public Schools, Stead Charter School, and alternative schools within Denver Metro to address chronic absenteeism and credit recovery in creative ways. High school students who are not showing up to school and who have been either referred to the truancy court or are at risk of being referred are picked up in the Field Academy van each day to learn throughout the community in an immersive, personalized environment. Anna Graves, welcome to the Liberated podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. We had the opportunity to chat about a month or 6 weeks ago for an article that I wrote about chronic absenteeism for the 74. And I'm just so delighted to have you on the podcast to kind of share more about your story, your background in education, and what really has motivated you to get involved in the alternative education space, and especially your work now with chronically absent students and students who are at risk of dropping out in the kind of larger Denver area. So let's start, Anna, if we could, by having you share a little bit about your background. Your kind of entry point into education was in wilderness education and outdoor learning. How did that come about? How did you become interested in that in the beginning?
Totally. Thinking about, I started rock climbing when I was in high school. That was kind of the biggest piece. That was like my outlet. And so in college, outdoor education was a big piece of something that I learned about. I was part of the outdoor club. I was hiking all the time. And then I realized that I could have this as a job. Like as I was tracking towards graduation, I was like, oh my gosh, I can go hiking and lead kids, and this can be I can get paid like camp for dollars. This is gorgeous. What I was most interested in is working in outdoor education that was long term for the student. There's a lot of programs that are kind of one offs for a student to experience, where it's just for one summer of their whole life or just for a weekend. And so I found a program called City Kids Wilderness Project based in Wyoming and DC, who works with kids for 5 years engaging in wilderness activities. And so I went and worked for them. I think in that time, I spent the next 5 years dedicated to outdoor education with Knowles, with a school called United World College down in New Mexico. I was working in California. So it was kind of this like potpourri of different organizations, which allowed me to be like, oh, wait, this is a really transformative platform for students, right? Where they come out, they get to let go of a lot of their life baggage, be in a new place, and then really humbled by the natural environment. What I was really curious about is how we could transfer that into a public school. Like what did this really mean to become accessible? Because as we worked in the wilderness, students would have no idea where they were, right? They would pull up in this van to a trailhead and they'd be like, no idea if this is 5 minutes from my house or 5 hours from my house. And in really thinking about access, I was like, well, how do we get students to a place where they can bring their families back to this area, where they can feel comfortable leading other people, instead of, again, it being this one-off of outdoor education. So I worked with a few programs that were already connected to public schools, and then moved into trying to open my own charter school. That is what I spent multiple years working on.
Yeah, tell us about that, Anna, before we get into the Field Academy. What was it like trying to open a charter school? What ultimately happened there?
Totally. So I joined a founding team of a group that was trying to open a co-created school here in Southwest Denver. The biggest hope that we had was that we could build a school that was a community center, that we would have meals that family members could attend, that students could stay late, that siblings could be there. So instead of this being a siloed educational environment, we became part of the community in a big way. And through multiple years of co-creation, we were hearing from families about exactly what they wanted that to look like. Sadly, like our timing kind of opening was around 2020, 2021. And in that, I think that our building crisis here in Denver to be able to actually open a school was a huge prominent issue. And then it also was a time of really high gentrification of the community. So a lot of the families we had co-created this entire school with were being gentrified out, and it didn't align for us to open a school that was for a totally different community that um, we hadn't built with. Uh, and so in that time, we decided not to move forward with our charter process, and then kind of all spread out into different educational avenues.
And I know one thing you told me, Anna, when we last spoke for the article interview was that even though you were excited about the prospect of opening this charter school, it still didn't feel alternative enough for you. You were saying that, you're still in four walls of a classroom. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what was that drive there for you? What were you feeling about wanting something really new and different?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest piece is like if I think about a traditional classroom, right? We like work really hard to put up decals on our windows that are like of Paris, right? Or we put books out. I'm so sorry, the fire alarm is now going off. I'm like, or some emergency alarm. The So we put up decals on our windows, or we like put books or create these images of other places, and students don't actually viscerally know those places, right? So it's really, really hard to be like, hey, I want to talk to you about an art museum when we are just using a book to talk about art, right? And so in that concept, there was no educator I talked to who wasn't super excited about more field trips or more road trips, but there seemed to be a gap of the actual transition into a school that didn't have walls. And so I think in this challenge of creating Field Academy, the question was like, what are we so attached to about the four walls? Like, what do we think is so transformative about the four walls? And if we take them away, do we think we're still able to provide a really good product and a strong product? And I think the answer is yes, but
And
yeah.
you're showing it, you're proving it. So tell us what happened next. It's the charter school. You decide not to move ahead with that. You're still thinking, gosh, schooling could be different. Education and learning could and should be different, could be outside of the four walls of a conventional classroom. How did you get from kind of that point to the Field Academy?
Yeah, I think this is one piece that maybe differs than other entrepreneurs, but I think my goal was to not found something else. I think I'd already been on the founding journey, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a long road. Like, what is going to happen? And so I started calling a lot of people. Like, I just called organizations that were like, hey, are you anywhere close to similar to what I want there to be in existence? Like, are you road tripping across the country? Do you serve high schoolers? Do you show job exposure and career exposure in your programming? Do you not want to have a building? Like all of these questions. And most of the people I was calling were folks already in alternative ed. So as I was doing that, we were working under the title, or sorry, what do you call it? The name RISO semester for a long time. And in that was calling these schools and found Field Academy, who had been running regional programming. They were dormant and had been dormant for 2 years at the time when I called them. And I was like, y'all are the closest thing. Like, what are you all doing? And so in that collaborative spirit, right, they were closing as an organization anyway. I came in with my vision and dream, and took that over. And I would say that is kind of what's happened with multiple other avenues of there's a lot of people who've tried similar things, and to be able to source from them, like there was an amazing semester called the Over Yonder semester in California, and they've been shut for almost 10 years. But talking to their founders, I was like, well, you've attempted this. Like, let's collaborate on what the next iteration of this is. And then now we're sitting in a place where, so we now run as Field Academy and have become the same program, and have now created the semester and the credit recovery. And then we just had another organization called Bike and Build dissolve into us as a closing alternative organization, also around this hope that we can be a hub for experiential organizations that are closing and keep them alive in some way to make sure that they're not all taken off the map.
I love that you were sort of burnt out from being a founder in kind of trying to get the charter school launch, and said, okay, I don't want to be an entrepreneur. I just want to come into an organization that's doing what I'm hoping to do. And then, of course, you end up as an entrepreneur and kind of reviving a program that was on its way out. So what is that like? What has it been like in this entrepreneurial journey compared to when you were trying to start the charter school?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like one, it's just really hard. Like I think for any entrepreneur, I want to acknowledge that it's just a really hard thing. And I think I saw a dream of being in education or being an entrepreneur where it was like a montage of like beautiful like days, right? Where it was like, and then I get strong and then I get fit and then here I am as a businesswoman. Like I just like thought it would be that way. And then instead I'm like eating Cheetos on my couch, you know, wondering what I should do next. And so I think I like want to normalize that, as that's been a huge part of my journey, is being like, hey, what is the job? Like that was like a whole year of this, is like, what is the job to create this? And then I started piloting a lot of programs, which I highly recommend for anyone. Because when I was piloting, I was like, oh, what's the actual need? Like, instead of me guessing what I think is going to happen, let me actually sit there and see this product in action and see how students respond. I think that we've had a lot of challenges around the demographic of student we serve and how much they want to travel. I think that I'll talk to an administrator and they'll be like, this is amazing. Like, we're sending students on this semester right away. Like, this is awesome, which is super exciting. We love, love, love that so many public schools are excited to work with us. And when you actually sit down and talk to the students, a lot of the students work a job already. They already take care of a sibling. They see themselves as a really important role in their family or in their community. And so a traveling program within this demographic of student is actually often not exciting, where I'm like, who isn't going to want to jump on this? And instead, that's why we've iterated into creating these daily road trips and traveling programs where they still go home at night, because that was so influential in how students, what students wanted to see, that they still wanted to be out on the road, but they couldn't do this multi-day overnight program.
Right. So sort of piloting, testing, experimenting. So let's get into what is the Field Academy, because it really encompasses several different programs, but all very immersive and community based. You are recording this podcast from the Denver Art Museum, one of the locations you frequently visit with your students. So tell us what the Field Academy actually is and does.
Yes. So Field Academy is a experiential credit recovery program. So our school is based on students who are already deficient or have failed a who have already failed a class or more. And I would say on average, we're looking at two major statistics nationally, right? We're seeing that 1/3 of high schoolers don't show up each day to school. And so if those students are not showing up, then they are deficient in either finishing their semester or they are multiple years behind. So that's like one of our major programs, is just responding to how does a student then pass and graduate if they're not attending regularly. And then we have a more niche program, which is us in connection to court systems, for students who are already in truancy court to be referred to us to join a daily program. And our truancy program is based in our piloting. What we saw was that most of those students lived in a space of school avoidance and saying, I don't know. So it would be like, are you interested in auto mechanics? I don't know. Do you want to be a cook? I don't know. Instead of, I think, a student that we may particularly imagine who's in school, who's like, well, I know I love video games, right? Most of the truant students that we work with are so school avoidant and so exposure avoidant that a lot of our goal is to just show them a lot of different things and engage them, so then they can figure out what they're interested in and what they would like to do.
And it sounds like it's working. I mean, when we spoke before, you were saying that you have students who are rarely going to school. Like you said, they're sort of school averse. Some of that is because they have these family obligations, as you mentioned. They're trying to help support their families. In other cases, you mentioned that they find the classroom to be punitive and to sort of have this coercion that turns them off from conventional schooling. So they say, why should we even, bother going? But it's working when you show up at their house and take them in the van to these places throughout the community. So tell us more about what that looks like for them.
Yeah. So I would say that one of the the wins is that we are deeply in the community, right? So like if it's the art museum, if it's an auto body space, if it's going to a restaurant and eating somewhere, all of that is a very immersive where the student doesn't have the ability to just say no right away, right? Like that's new to them. So then they're experiencing it without it being explained to them to then experience. So our rates right now are, we have like a 98% attendance rate within our shorter credit recovery programs. It's 100%. We haven't had a student miss those, whereas our truant programs that we've had a few days where students are sick. I think the biggest thing that we're also doing is personalizing their education. So we come to their house, we knock on their door, we're there to interact with their family and with them to build trust in a system that I think many students have already lost faith in. And then we also serve 3 meals throughout the day. So it's a space of getting your needs met and also sitting there with a student and actually personalizing, like, what are you curious about? What should we do today? Do you want to go walking? Like, have you walked recently? You probably were on video games all night last night. Like, what should we do now? So I would say those are the big wins for us and reasons why we're seeing students attend is because it's just they feel connected and they feel valued.
So it makes me think, and I talk about this in the 74 article, that in a large part, the chronic absenteeism crisis is a problem of schooling, not of young people, not of children, right? So that if we can make education and learning relevant and engaging and personalized and supportive, then learners will gladly come, even if they have these family responsibilities or other things going on in their lives. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think absolutely, right? Like I think that there's also a big disconnect right now in our system where with what we call school and what we call life, right? And so it's really easy for students to say, well, I'm not a student or I don't want to be in school because we somehow have ostracize that to be like all that looks like is worksheets on a piece of paper more than it is like applicable to their life. And so I think one of the big learnings for me in looking at unschooling and micro schools is that there's a huge there's a huge breadth of room for us to provide education for public school students just to feel that, right? To feel like the thing that they're learning is valuable to their regular life. And so I feel really strongly when within our students, we say that this is school and this is them learning because they also have to feel that, right? Like if you're learning avoidant and then all of a sudden you learn how to make mac and cheese and then someone tells you learned how to make mac and cheese and you're like, no, I didn't, but I made mac and cheese and I really liked it, right? Like that's the goal. Like the goal is for students to be like, wait, I've already done the thing and I've processed it. Maybe I don't need to be so scared of this thing called education. Why, like maybe that's okay.
Yeah. So I guess the unschooler in me would say that this should be more the norm than the exception, right? That the Field Academy is this sort of niche program for a group of high risk students who are chronically absent, in some cases in the truant system. And yet I think this shouldn't be an alternative program. It should be the program, right? I mean, do you see a pathway in which the model that you've created and the work that the Field Academy is doing becomes more the norm than the exception in education?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's why, right, we are committed to being a public school offering. That I think that I do want to make that distinction is that we're not a private space. And so, and that is the hope that we can actually move the needle on public school more than it is. I think within the unschooling micro school movement, I felt like I was having a lot of conversations where people were like, there's no money in public school, like no one's going to partner. And then I'm like, well, actually, once we exist, we are seeing those partnerships come in and a lot of openness to what we're offering. I think to your question of can this be the long-term solution? I think it can. And my hope in iterating through these next few years is what does that really mean to work with a student in Detroit and a student in Houston, right? Like, is there a way to scale this program when the cultural aspect of community exploration, et cetera, look really different? And how do we become really culturally responsive as a program when we know that this gap exists, right? Like between the system, the crack is really clear that kids are dropping out or failing out for some reason. how are we going to re-engage? So that's the hope in the future, I think, is not only being a re-engagement school, but being able to be the school for all students.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about how the model works as a public-private partnership, because you're, privately run, but publicly funded through these districts. Of course, lots of districts have received federal money, as part of the COVID response and to fund kind of chronic absenteeism and credit recovery in the wake of school closures. There's lots of state and local funding around chronic absenteeism now that I imagine that you're able to tap into. But tell us a little bit about how that financial model works.
Yeah, so what we originally talked to a district about is what percentage of their per pupil revenue are we going to work with, right? If that is that we're going to work with a student for 2 weeks, what percentage of that per pupil revenue that they bring in each year are we going to work towards receiving? And the reason for that is that there is really amazing pockets of money right now that are supporting students with IEPs. There's supporting chronic absence, truancy, et cetera. And what we want to be able to do is be a long-term option for the school. So what is our lowest bracket? Like if we're just talking about that one student's revenue, within that, what we've seen is that we can come in at any percentage, right? Some of our schools were working at 90% of per pupil revenue, and some of them were working at 20% because we only work with those, or 5% honestly, because we only work with those students for a weekend. The other option is in pockets that we're seeing money is especially around COVID response, right? Is like a lot of folks are ending their COVID money in these next few years. And so for them to be able to try something really innovative like us has been a really open door. And then I think that there's also this bucket of money around behavioral health and social emotional learning that at the end of the day, we can't have students regulate very well in school if it's already a space of trigger by walking in the building. And so we've been able to come in for students who are not doing well in regulating, and then using the outdoors community as their space because of their mental needs.
Ah, that's great. And you're really kind of pushing what learning and schooling looks like, right? So you're at the Denver Art Museum. The students are kind of recovering their language arts credits through being in the art museum. And, tell us about, I guess, how that looks in real life. How are they accumulating credits with these community resources?
Absolutely. Yeah. So each day we put 1 to 2 1 to 2 state standards to that day for that subject. So, right, let's say this week we're running only math work. That means each day we'll have at least 1 math standard, if not 2. And those students will go into those community partnerships like the Denver Art Museum and the auto body shop. And then in that time, will you apply those standards through some academic principle, right? If that's geometry or trigonometry, and use problems that are applicable to exactly to that community partner. So we were just building curriculum for auto body shop. It's like, how can we actually teach not only language of auto body parts, but also the geometry of how exhaust pipe is built. And then that student can see that as extremely relevant for them to maintain a relationship with auto body shop.
And then what about the art museum? What are some of the activities there?
Totally. The art museum we focus mostly on English. Today we're focusing mostly on English, where that will again take a standard, and then we'll use all of the written documentation that's in a building. So if that's the artist statement to flyers, et cetera. And then we're using that as close reading to then compare to something that is the art. So we do a lot of comparison work here. We also do a lot of self-reflection and the students actually sitting and writing. And then we just did an activity this morning where students choose a painting and then they write the story of the person in that painting or what they think is happening. So however we can pull out creative modes for them to engage in that academic piece.
And what is the feedback that you're getting from students, from their families? I mean, clearly you have an enormous retention rate. I think, did you say 97% attendance rate from students who were previously never going to school? So already that's showing success. But what are you hearing directly from the learners and their families about the experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think within our shorter programs, our students are just blown away. Like every single time a student is like, what? I was just going to sit on my phone, or I was just going to play video games all weekend. And I had no idea any of this was out here, right? Like that is the dream response. And we get that one a lot. It's also students being like, I can't wait to take my family here. Like that is like where I'm like, that's the goal, right? That you see this as part of your community and that you can use this resource. Within our truancy program, I think especially for parents where it's a really end of the road option, right? Like they've been trying to be in school for a long time. Those parents, I'm like trying to think of some of their quotes. Like, this is a godsend. We've been like praying for an option. There's also other parents who are like, this is literally the only thing that we have. And we can't believe how excited our son is every day when he hasn't gotten out of bed for weeks. So I think we're seeing people feel the human connection that we're trying to offer. And I think what we are trying to do as well as we can is transfer that from the teacher being the center of that relationship to now this community is the relationship. And they can be used all the time, right? So we're not trying to hold the power, a very Freudian model of not only being the resource, but actually the resources among you.
So what's next, Anna? What does the future hold for the Field Academy in both the short term and the long term? I guess what are some of your immediate plans and your bold dreams?
Yeah, we're spending our next couple of months trying to hire and get ahead of the curve. Right now, we're having to turn down a lot of contracts and work with public districts and students who are being referred to us. And my hope is that we can start saying yes by having a stronger, longer term staff with us. So that's a big one. We're also running our first semester this summer. That will be a road trip from DC to San Diego. And that we're using as our truancy court response as well as an expulsion school. So a placement for students who've already been expelled. So that's a big one. And then otherwise, yeah, we're just trying to also have conversations with other states. I think our dream has always been a national model because we see it as really important to be working on the civic fabric of this country. And so because credit recovery is such a huge problem, right now we're currently talking to some folks in Oregon and in Portland, Maine, and in Texas to see how we can replicate this model and then work together.
Oh, just amazing. So, Anna, what is the best way for my listeners and viewers to learn more about the Field Academy and follow your progress and connect with you?
Yes. First of all, please follow our website and our Instagram at Field Academy. We would also always love to hear from you and your community and how this model could potentially work. So giving me a call, my phone number is on the website, or sending me an email. And then we are always looking for partnerships. So if you're a school, if you're a family looking for support, or if you're looking for as a funder to support this kind of innovative work.
Wonderful. Well, best wishes to you. I look forward to hearing what happens next with the Field Academy. Hopefully, you're national sooner than later, and then we can check back and see the impact that you're making. Anna Graves, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thanks for having me.